The morning sun rose slowly over the small town of Giddings, Texas, on October 11th, 1878. The streets were filled with whispers. People had come from miles around, their wagons parked in rows, their faces full of curiosity and fear. They were here for one reason, to watch a man die. His name was Bill Longley. To some, he was a cold-blooded murderer. To others, he was a charming rogue, a man who lived by his own rules in a world gone mad. But to everyone in that crowd, he was famous, the outlaw who had outdrawn lawmen, soldiers, and bounty hunters. Today, the legend would end with a rope around his neck. As the crowd gathered near the gallows, the wooden platform creaked in the wind. The noose swayed slightly, silent, waiting. The sheriff wiped sweat from his forehead. It wasn't every day you hung a man like Bill Longley. Bill stood tall as the deputies led him forward. He was only 27, but his face carried the marks of a life lived too fast. He had thick dark hair, sharp eyes, and a half-smile that refused to fade, even now. Dressed neatly in a vest and boots, he looked more like a traveling preacher than a killer. The people whispered as he passed. That's him, the one who killed all those men. They say he shot his best friend. Bill heard them, but he didn't flinch. If anything, his grin grew wider. He loved attention. He always had. A minister stepped forward, offering a final prayer. Bill listened quietly for a moment, then said almost playfully, "Preacher, I've said enough prayers for myself. Let's save yours for the living." The crowd murmured again. Some gasped, some chuckled nervously. That was Bill, confident, proud, unafraid. Even standing inches from death, he refused to show fear. The sheriff read the sentence out loud. "William Preston Longley, you have been found guilty of the murder of Wilson Anderson. You are hereby sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul." Bill nodded slowly. "I deserve this fate," he said. "It's a debt I've owed for a long time." Those words silenced the crowd. Even the wind seemed to pause. For the first time, his voice carried a hint of truth, not bravado, not arrogance, but acceptance. The hangman adjusted the rope, slipping it over Bill's head. The coarse fibers scratched against his neck. He looked out over the crowd, at the farmers, the soldiers, the women holding children, and smiled again. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was defiance. Or maybe it was just Bill being Bill, too proud to let anyone see him break. To understand that smile, you'd have to know the man behind it. Bill Longley wasn't born a killer. He was born into chaos. In 1851, Texas was a wild and broken land. The Civil War had torn it apart, and when it ended, anger filled the air like dust after a storm. People didn't trust each other. Law was weak. Revenge ruled the day. Bill grew up in that world, a smart, restless boy on a small farm. His father worked hard. His mother prayed harder. But young Bill didn't want to plow fields or herd cattle. He wanted something bigger: freedom, adventure, respect. And in those days, a gun was the fastest way to earn it. He learned to shoot early. By the time most boys were learning to read, Bill could hit a tin can from 50 yards. The crack of a revolver became his favorite sound. The smell of gunpowder, his perfume. But skill wasn't enough. Bill had something else: charm. He could make people like him, even when they knew he was dangerous. He was funny, polite, even gentle at times. But behind the smile was a temper like lightning, quick, violent, and deadly. By 17, he had already killed his first man. It happened fast, and an argument turned to shouting. Shouting turned to gunfire. When the smoke cleared, Bill was standing and the other man wasn't. That day changed everything. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He looked at the body, nodded once, and said quietly, "Guess that's how it goes." From that moment, the line between right and wrong disappeared. Killing had given him power, and power made him feel alive. Back at the gallows, the hangman's hand tightened on the lever. Bill stood motionless, staring at the horizon. Some said he looked peaceful. Others swore he smirked until the end. The preacher whispered, "May God receive your soul." The trapdoor dropped. The crowd gasped, and for a moment, just a moment, Bill's body didn't move. His neck didn't snap cleanly. His legs twitched, his hands shook. A few turned away. A few watched every second. Then it was over. The outlaw was gone, but almost immediately, the whispers began. "Did you see that? He didn't die right away. I heard they cut him down early. Some say he's still alive." Rumors spread faster than wind through dry grass. Some claimed his friends bribed the hangman. Others swore they saw Bill riding away that very night. In the years that followed, letters surfaced from Bill Longley, written from distant states, telling stories only he could know. Was it him? Or just another legend of the Wild West refusing to die? One thing was certain: Bill Longley had achieved what he always wanted, to be remembered, not as a farmer's son, not as a soldier, but as a name that people whispered long after he was gone. His story would echo through Texas for generations. To some, he was a monster. To others, a misunderstood man trapped by his own time. But one truth remained. Bill Longley was both a man and a myth, forever caught between charm and cruelty, fame and damnation. And on that October morning in 1878, when the rope snapped tight, a legend was born, not of justice, but of the Wild West itself. The year was 1851, deep in Austin County, Texas, a land wild and untamed. The sun burned hot over wide-open fields, and life was hard but simple. It was here that a baby boy named William Preston Longley took his first breath on October 6th. He would grow up to be known by another name, Bill Longley, one of the most dangerous gunfighters the West would ever know. But on that day, he was just a baby in a wooden crib, born into a family of hard-working farmers. His parents, Campbell and Sarah Longley, wanted nothing more than peace, crops that would grow, and a future for their children. The world, however, had other plans. The Longley family's farm sat in the middle of a Texas rebuilding from war. When Bill was just a boy, the Civil War tore through America like wildfire. Men went off to fight, farms went empty, and when the war ended, nothing was the same. Texas was full of anger and confusion. Slavery had ended, but hatred hadn't. Union soldiers patrolled the towns. Lawmen were few, justice was uneven, and violence was everywhere. Bill grew up hearing gunshots echo through the night, and stories of men who settled arguments with bullets instead of words. He watched men drink hard, fight harder and die young, in that kind of world. A gun wasn't just a weapon, it was respect, security, and freedom. Bill was smart, sharper than most boys his age. He could read a man's face like others read a book. But he had something else too, curiosity and daring. He loved to explore, to test limits, to prove himself. By the time he was 10, he was already sneaking his father's rifle out to practice behind the barn. He would set up cans, bottles, even tree bark, and hit them one by one until the barrel grew hot. Neighbors said the boy had the eye of an eagle and the nerve of a wolf. Every sound of gunfire thrilled him. Every bullseye made him stand a little taller. When other boys played tag, Bill practiced drawing his gun fast from a holster made of old leather. He wasn't just learning to shoot, he was learning to be dangerous. But there was something darker growing inside him, a temper. Bill hated being told what to do. He argued with his father, mocked teachers, and laughed in the face of anyone who tried to correct him. Bill's a wild one, people would say. He'll either be a leader or a killer. His mother prayed for him every night. His father whipped him more than once, hoping to break that wild streak. But it only made him more defiant. When the Civil War ended and Texas came under Reconstruction rule, young Bill began to see the world as a battlefield between power and weakness. He wanted to be powerful, never weak. He looked at soldiers and outlaws the same way. Men who took what they wanted and lived on their own terms. That was the kind of man he wanted to be. It was also a time when racial hatred was everywhere. The South had lost, but many refused to accept change. Bill grew up hearing talk of revenge and bitterness, of men blaming newly freed black families for their misery, and though still a boy, he soaked it all in. The anger, the fear, the false pride. When he grew older, that poison would turn into violence. But at this stage, it was just part of the world around him, a world that raised boys to hate before they learned to think. By the age of 16, Bill was restless. Farm life bored him. He wanted something bigger, danger, money, excitement. He started running with rougher crowds, drifters, gamblers, and horse thieves. He learned how to drink, curse, and cheat at cards. One local story said that when a group of older men mocked him for his youth, Bill simply smiled and said, "You won't laugh when I'm the last man standing." And when one of them reached for a gun, Bill drew first. The man dropped dead in the dirt. Whether that story was true or not, one thing was certain. Bill Longley had fired his first shot in anger. There was no going back. Once that line was crossed, everything changed. Killing made Bill feel powerful. It gave him something he'd been chasing all along: attention, fear, and control. He didn't feel guilt. He felt alive, and soon, one killing led to another. He claimed it was always self-defense. But deep down, even he knew it wasn't always true. Each fight made him more confident, more dangerous, and more famous. The townspeople began whispering his name in fear. The newspapers called him a reckless youth with the devil's luck. Bill liked that. He began to dress sharp, walk tall, and talk smooth. He became what he had always wanted to be: somebody. By the time he turned 18, Bill was already wanted in several Texas counties. Lawmen had his name on their lists, and preachers used him as a warning in their Sunday sermons. But Bill didn't hide. He laughed at danger. He rode into towns knowing bounty hunters might be waiting. He played cards with men who wanted him dead and left with their money. He wasn't just running from the law. He was running from the truth that the boy born into chaos had become the chaos himself. And though he didn't know it yet, the path he'd chosen would end not in glory, but on a wooden platform beneath a hanging rope. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the dry Texas plains. A puff of dust rose from a wooden fence post, and a young man lowered his smoking revolver. His aim was perfect. His hand didn't shake. His name was Bill Longley, and he was no longer a farm boy. He was becoming something else, something far more dangerous. By the time Bill was 19, he had already learned how to survive on the edge. The world around him was harsh, and only the fast, the bold, and the ruthless lived long. Texas was filled with men like him: drifters, soldiers, gamblers, and killers. But even among them, Bill stood out. He wasn't just fast with a gun. He was charming, unpredictable, and fearless. He traveled from town to town, never staying too long. Sometimes he worked on ranches, sometimes as a hired guard. Other times he lived by his gun, gambling, stealing, or collecting debts that weren't his to collect. Everywhere he went, trouble followed like a shadow. People who met him described him in different ways. Some said he was polite and well-spoken, the kind of man who could make you laugh at a bar. Others said he was cruel, with cold eyes that could turn deadly in a second. Both were true. Bill could charm a room and then destroy it if someone looked at him the wrong way. He was tall and lean, with sharp features and a quick smile that hid his temper. He dressed better than most cowhands: clean shirts, polished boots, a hat pulled low. He wanted people to notice him, to remember him. He carried himself like a man who believed he couldn't die. In those days, gunfights were as common as bar fights. But Bill took them seriously. He practiced every day, drawing his gun again and again until it was second nature. He could shoot with either hand, hit a coin tossed in the air, or fire 6 shots before another man cleared his holster. He lived for speed, for precision, for control. It wasn't long before people started calling him one of the fastest guns in Texas, and Bill liked that name. He liked the way people stared when he walked into a saloon. He liked the silence that followed when someone whispered, "That's Bill Longley." But fame came with danger. Every man with a pistol wanted to test him. Every lawman wanted to catch him. And every bartender knew that wherever Bill went, bullets might fly before sunrise. Bill's temper was his worst enemy. A simple insult could turn deadly. More than once he shot men over a card game, a drink, or a word said too loud. When the dust settled, he would shrug, light a cigarette, and say, he shouldn't have drawn first. Whether the other man actually did or not didn't matter. Bill's version was the only one left. There were times when he tried to live straight. Once he joined a group of cattle drivers, hoping to earn an honest wage. For a few months it worked. He worked hard, told jokes around the fire, and sang with the others under the stars. But that peace never lasted. One night a man accused him of cheating at cards. Bill laughed it off at first, but when the man called him a liar, he stood up slow, his hand hovering near his revolver. The others froze. Everyone knew what was coming. The man reached for his gun, too late. Bill's pistol flashed once. The man fell backward, his chair toppling with a dull thud. The others just stared. Bill holstered his gun and said quietly, "Let's keep playing." Then he sat back down and finished his hand. That was Bill Longley. Cold, calm, and terrifyingly quick, He didn't kill for money or revenge most of the time. He killed for pride, for survival, or because the world had taught him that showing mercy was weakness. And in the Wild West, weakness could get you buried before sundown. Rumors about him began to spread faster than he could ride. Some said he'd killed 30 men. Others said 50. Bill didn't correct them. In fact, he encouraged the stories. The more people feared him, the safer he was. Fear was his armor, but fear also made him lonely. He couldn't trust anyone. Friends became enemies, and enemies became ghosts. He often traveled alone, sleeping under the stars with one eye open, his revolver resting on his chest. Sometimes, when the night was quiet, he would think about home, about his mother's prayers, his father's disappointed face, the boy he used to be. But those thoughts never lasted long. The morning always came, and with it, another day of running, fighting, and pretending he was free. In 1870, looking for a new start, Bill made a surprising choice. He joined the U.S. Army. Maybe he thought discipline would change him. Maybe he wanted respect. Or maybe he was just tired of running. Whatever the reason, it didn't last. The Army life didn't suit him. Orders, rules, and authority made his blood boil. He argued with officers, drank too much, and caused trouble wherever he went. Within months, he deserted, stealing a horse, a rifle, and enough bullets to make sure no one could drag him back. That desertion turned him into a wanted man once again. But to Bill, it didn't matter. He was used to being hunted. The Army was just another enemy on a list that kept growing. By then, his name was feared across Texas. Mothers warned their sons not to grow up like him. Lawmen kept his picture pinned on their walls. And yet, when Bill rode into a town, some people admired him. The rebel who answered to no one, who lived fast and took what he wanted. He had become what the frontier made of so many men. A gunfighter, a drifter, a symbol of the Wild West's dark heart. Bill Longley wasn't born evil, but every step he took, every gun he fired, pulled him further from the boy he once was. By the time he realized it, it was too late. He was no longer running from trouble. He was the trouble, and the path ahead would only lead deeper into blood, betrayal, and legend. The saloon doors creaked open, and every head turned. The piano went quiet, and the bartender froze mid-pour. In the doorway stood a man with calm eyes, a tilted hat, and a smile that didn't belong in a place like this. It was Bill Longley. He looked like a gentleman, clean shirt, neat boots, gun hanging low on his hip. But everyone in that room knew better. That smile wasn't friendly. It was a warning. Bill walked up to the bar, set down a silver coin, and said, "Whiskey, and make it quick." The bartender's hands shook a little as he poured the drink. Bill noticed, and he chuckled softly. "Don't worry," he said. "I ain't here to kill anyone." "Not tonight." The crowd laughed nervously. That was how it always was with Bill. He could turn a room from fear to laughter in seconds. He had a way of making people like him, even when they wanted to hate him. They called him the devil with a smile, and it fit. He had charm. Confidence and danger wrapped together like smoke around a flame. On good days, Bill was the kind of man who'd buy drinks for the whole bar, tell stories that made people cry with laughter, and play cards until dawn. He talked smooth, treated women with respect, and always seemed to have money. No one knew how. He could talk a sheriff into letting him go. He could calm a fight before it started, or start one when he felt like it. But when that smile faded, everything changed. Bill's temper came fast and sharp. If he felt insulted, if someone said the wrong word or even looked at him wrong, his gun was in his hand before anyone blinked. He wasn't always drunk when he killed, but whiskey made it easier. It took away the little bit of mercy left in him. One night in 1873, in a dusty Texas town, Bill was playing poker with 3 ranchers. The stakes were high, and the whiskey was strong. When he won a hand, one of the ranchers accused him of cheating. Bill laughed it off at first, but then the man called him a liar. Bill leaned forward slowly, smiling that same calm smile, and said, "You sure you want to call me that again?" The rancher's hand twitched toward his belt. That was all it took. Bill's revolver flashed once, the sound of the shot cutting through the music and laughter. The man dropped to the floor. Bill stood up, finished his drink, and said quietly, "Guess the game's over." Then he walked out into the night like nothing had happened. People couldn't understand him. He could be kind, even generous, and then become a killer in the blink of an eye. Some said he was cursed. Others said he just liked killing. But maybe the truth was simpler. Maybe Bill Longley was a man who didn't know how to stop being angry. He had grown up in a world that taught him violence was power. And now every time he pulled the trigger, he felt that power again. Still, he had moments of regret. Moments when the silence after a gunshot seemed louder than the shot itself. Sometimes, after a killing, he'd ride out of town and camp alone under the stars. He'd stare at the sky, turning his gun in his hands, and whisper, "I didn't mean to." But by morning, the guilt was gone. He'd clean his gun, light a cigarette, and move on to the next town, the next game, the next fight. Bill's reputation spread far beyond Texas. Newspapers wrote stories about him, half true, half made up. They said he could shoot 6 men before any of them hit the ground. They said he never missed, that he was faster than Billy the Kid and crueler than Jesse James. Bill didn't argue. He liked being talked about. Fame made him feel invincible, but fame also brought enemies. Other gunfighters wanted to prove they were faster. Bounty hunters wanted the reward money. Lawmen wanted justice. And Bill? He wanted none of it. He just wanted to keep living life on his own terms. Despite his violent temper, there was something magnetic about him. He had a way of looking at people that made them believe he was more than just a killer. Women were drawn to him. Men admired him or feared him. Sometimes both. He could sit down with strangers, tell a joke, and have everyone laughing. But behind those laughs was tension, because no one knew when the laughter might end in gunfire. Even his closest friends said being around Bill was like sitting beside a lit fuse. You never knew when he'd explode. One story tells of a preacher who once tried to save him. The man sat with Bill after a killing and said, "Son, you're living like there's no God." Bill smiled and replied, "Maybe God's too scared to live in Texas." That was Bill's way. Half joke, half truth. He believed the world was cruel and unfair, and that no man could survive by playing fair. He didn't trust lawmen, politicians, or even friends. To him, everyone was out for themselves. And so was he. By the mid-1870s, Bill had killed more men than he could count. Some deserved it. Some didn't. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. He moved constantly. Waco, Navasota, Evergreen, and dozens of small towns in between. Every place he left behind carried a story, a grave, or a scar. He had become both legend and warning, a symbol of the Wild West's dark beauty, a man with a smile that could make you laugh or make you pray. At night, when the fires burned low, some said they could hear him singing old songs to himself, voice soft and lonely. For all his swagger, for all his violence, there was something broken in him, a sadness he tried to hide behind laughter and smoke. He once told a woman he loved, "I know where I'm going to end up. The rope's already waiting. I just don't know when." And he was right, because in the end, Bill Longley's charm couldn't save him from what he'd become. The same smile that made him famous was the one he'd wear on the day he died. The summer sun beat down on the Louisiana plains. Soldiers marched in dusty lines, their boots sinking into the dry earth. Among them was a tall young man with sharp eyes and a restless mind, Bill Longley. He wore the uniform of a U.S. Army soldier, but he didn't look like one. His step was too casual, his grin too confident. Bill wasn't a man who followed orders well. He wasn't made for discipline. But he had joined anyway, maybe to escape his past, maybe to find a new life, or maybe just to hide in plain sight. In 1870, when Bill enlisted, he was already wanted in parts of Texas. The Army seemed like a good place to disappear. No one asked too many questions, and if you kept your mouth shut, your past stayed buried. For a while it worked. Bill trained hard, rode well, and shot better than anyone in his company. His commanders noticed his aim and quick reflexes. "Longley," one officer said, "you're a fine soldier when you want to be." Bill smirked. "That's the problem, sir. I don't always want to be." It was the truth. The Army's strict rules didn't fit a man like him. He hated being told when to wake up, when to eat, when to sleep. He had lived too long by his own code, fast, free, and wild. At first, he tried to play along. He marched when told, stood in line, and followed orders. But the other soldiers noticed his attitude. He joked when they were supposed to be serious. He picked fights over small things, a lost bet, a dirty look, a careless word. Still, Bill had charm. He could make people laugh even after a long day in the scorching heat. Around campfires, he told stories of Texas, of gunfights, saloons, and wide-open land. Some believed him. Others thought he was making it all up. But everyone listened. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew people close even when they knew he was trouble. But that charm couldn't save him from himself. Bill's temper returned like an old friend. When a sergeant insulted him one night, Bill didn't just talk back. He threw a punch. The next day he was punished. They made him dig ditches for hours in the blazing sun. He cursed under his breath, thinking about the freedom he had given up. Each day felt like a prison sentence. The rules were tight, the walls invisible but real. Bill began to dream of the open plains, of wind on his face and a revolver on his hip. He started drinking again, sneaking whiskey into camp and sharing it with the few soldiers brave enough to break the rules. Those nights under the stars he'd laugh and say, "This ain't living. This is just waiting to die." And soon he decided waiting wasn't for him. One moonless night, Bill packed his few belongings, a pistol, some cartridges, and a bit of food. He saddled a horse from the army stables, tied his bedroll behind the saddle, and looked back once at the camp. Then he whispered, "Good riddance." And with that, he rode into the darkness. By the time the sun rose, the army had one less soldier and one more outlaw. Desertion was a serious crime, one that could get a man shot if he was caught. But Bill didn't care. He had been running from something all his life. Running from the law, from his past, from the person he was supposed to be. He felt alive again. The wide Texas sky stretched above him like an old friend. The sound of his horse's hooves was music to his ears. He was free to make his own choices, his own mistakes. But freedom came with a price. The army sent men after him, and Texas lawmen were already looking for him. Now both sides wanted his head. Bill didn't run to hide. He ran to stay ahead. He rode from town to town, sometimes using false names, sometimes his own. In one place he called himself Jim Webb. In another, Bill Jackson. But no matter what name he used, his reputation always caught up. People whispered stories of the soldier who deserted and turned back to killing. Some said he shot a man over a horse. Others claimed he robbed a store to pay for whiskey. The truth was lost in the dust of the roads he traveled. Bill's life turned into a pattern. Drink, gamble, fight, escape. He drifted through Louisiana, Arkansas, and back into Texas, leaving trouble behind every time. Sometimes he helped ranchers drive cattle, pretending to be a hard-working cowboy. But trouble always found him. One rancher said later, "Bill Longley could be the best hand you ever hired, till the whiskey hit him. Then you'd better get out of his way." He was his own worst enemy. The charm that made people trust him also made them underestimate him. The smile that invited friendship could turn deadly in an instant. One night, while playing cards with a group of soldiers who didn't recognize him, one man mentioned a deserter who looked a bit like you. Bill laughed. "Must have been a good-looking fella." The men laughed too. But when one pressed the joke, Bill's hand moved fast. His revolver flashed, and the laughter stopped. When it was over, Bill stood up, tossed a few coins on the table, and said, "That's for the funeral." Then he walked out, disappearing once again into the night. He wasn't proud of what he'd become. There were times when guilt crept in, times when he wondered what his life could have been if he'd stayed in the army, followed the rules, and kept his head down. But deep down he knew the truth. He could never live like that. The army wanted obedience. Bill wanted control. The two could never exist together. By now the law knew his name. Posters with his face appeared across Texas. "Wanted for murder and desertion," they read. There was a reward on his head, and bounty hunters began to follow his trail. But Bill Longley wasn't easy to catch. He was fast, clever, and fearless. He'd been running from death for years, and somehow he always stayed one step ahead. He had escaped the army, but not his fate. Every mile he rode only brought him closer to the end he already knew was waiting, the gallows, the rope, and the crowd. But for now he was still free, still laughing, still the man who couldn't be tamed, and somewhere in the distance, under that endless Texas sky, Bill Longley smiled to himself and said, "The world's got rules for men like me. I just don't follow them." The wind carried the scent of summer through the small Texas town of Evergreen. The streets were quiet, the air thick with heat and dust. A man on horseback rode slowly down the road, his hat pulled low, his revolver resting at his side. It was Bill Longley, and this time he wasn't running. He was hunting. The year was 1875, and Bill had returned to his home country in Lee County, Texas, the land where he'd grown up, laughed, and learned to shoot. But he wasn't here to visit family or friends. He was here because of one man, Wilson Anderson. Wilson wasn't just anyone. He had been Bill's childhood friend. They'd played together as boys, fished in the creeks, and shared dreams under the Texas stars. But those innocent days were long gone. Now, rumor had it that Wilson had spoken against Bill's uncle, maybe betrayed him, maybe insulted him, maybe something worse. The details were blurry, but in Bill's mind that didn't matter. In his world, loyalty was everything, and betrayal, real or imagined, was death. Bill's heart was full of rage and whiskey when he rode into Evergreen that day. His eyes were dark, and his mind was made up. He tied his horse outside a small house and waited. The door opened, and out stepped Wilson Anderson, just 22 years old, tall and calm, unaware that death was watching him from across the street. "Afternoon, Bill," Wilson said when he saw him. He smiled, the way old friends do when they meet after a long time. "Didn't expect to see you back around here." Bill smiled too, that same dangerous, quiet smile that had fooled so many before. "Yeah, I came back. Got some things to settle." They talked for a moment, but the words were hollow. There was too much unsaid between them. Wilson could sense it, the tension, the anger. He took a step back, his face changing. "Bill, whatever you heard, it ain't true. I never meant—" Bill's hand twitched. His gun was already in his grip. "Don't lie to me," Bill said softly. "You should have known better than to cross my blood." Before Wilson could speak again, the gun went off. One shot. Wilson fell to the ground, clutching his chest. The dust settled around him as his blood darkened the dirt. Bill stared for a moment, breathing hard. His hand shook just once before he holstered his gun. Then he turned, climbed on his horse, and rode away without looking back. The town was silent. That day changed everything. Until then, Bill had been an outlaw, a drifter, a killer. But somehow he'd always escaped the worst of justice. Now he had murdered a man who was once like a brother. There was no excuse, no misunderstanding. Everyone knew it. The killing of Wilson Anderson was the crime that would haunt Bill for the rest of his life, and the one that would finally catch up to him. For months after the murder, Bill was a ghost. He vanished into the back roads of Texas, hiding in the hills and swamps, sleeping under the stars. He avoided towns, lawmen, and strangers. Even he seemed shaken by what he had done. Some said he cried after that shooting, the first and only time. Others said he drank himself half to death trying to forget. No one knew for sure. What was certain was that the killing marked the beginning of his end. Bill's mind became darker, his moods more violent. He trusted no one. His laughter turned bitter. The charm that once drew people in now pushed them away. He rode with other outlaws for a time, men who robbed stagecoaches and rustled cattle. But even they found him too dangerous. One of them later said, Bill Longley could shoot a man as easy as he could shake his hand. Everywhere he went, death followed. He was no longer just fighting the world. He was fighting himself. Sometimes, when he was alone, he would think about Wilson, about the boy he'd fished with, the friend who had once stood by his side. He could still see Wilson's face when the gun went off. The shock, the pain, the disbelief. That image would visit him at night, when the fire burned low and the whiskey couldn't quiet his thoughts. Once, in a rare moment of honesty, Bill told a woman he met on the road, "I killed a good man once. Didn't mean to, but I did. Been paying for it ever since." She asked if he felt sorry. Bill looked into the fire and said, "Sorry don't change the past." Then he went quiet. As the months passed, news of the murder spread. Lawmen in several counties began searching for him. Posters with his name appeared again. Wanted, Bill Longley, for the cold-blooded murder of Wilson Anderson. The reward grew. So did the stories. Some claimed he'd gone mad. Others said he was cursed, that every time he killed, he saw Wilson's face again. By late 1876, Bill was running out of places to hide. He changed names, changed towns, but the law was always a few steps behind. Then came betrayal, the kind that made his crime come full circle. A man who once called Bill a friend turned on him. For a handful of dollars, he revealed Bill's hiding place to the authorities. When Bill found out, he laughed bitterly and said, "Figures. I killed my friend for less." There was no more hiding after that. His legend had grown too big and the law too determined. Looking back, some said that killing Wilson Anderson broke something in Bill Longley, the last piece of good that might have been left inside him. After that, he wasn't just an outlaw. He was a man walking toward his own destruction, step by step, mile by mile. He had betrayed his friend, and in doing so, betrayed himself. The rest of his life would be a slow punishment, not from the law, but from his own conscience. In the end, the boy who once laughed beside his friend under the Texas sky had become the man who shot him dead in the dust. And though Bill Longley would go on to kill again, to drink, to run, and to boast, a part of him died that day with Wilson Anderson, the part that still knew right from wrong. The summer heat hung heavy over Texas in 1877. The land was quiet, but tension filled the air. Somewhere out there, hiding among the trees and hills, was Bill Longley, the most wanted man in the state. He had been on the run for months. His name was in every newspaper. His face was on every wanted poster. The reward for his capture, dead or alive, had grown large enough to tempt anyone desperate for money. The killing of Wilson Anderson had made him a ghost, but ghosts can't run forever. Bill rode alone, most days his horse thin and tired, his clothes dirty from weeks on the trail. His revolver never left his side. He trusted no one. Every noise made his hand twitch toward his holster. Sometimes he stopped at small farms, pretending to be a traveler. He'd ask for food, tell a joke, flash that familiar smile, and move on before dawn. Other times he hid in the woods, living on whatever he could find. He was still dangerous, still fast, but there was something different about him now. A weariness in his eyes, a shadow that hadn't been there before. The killings, the running, the loneliness, they were catching up to him. One night, as he sat beside a campfire, he heard a voice from behind the trees. "You're a hard man to find, Bill." Bill turned slowly, his gun drawn before the voice even finished. But the figure that stepped out of the darkness wasn't a lawman. It was an old acquaintance, a man named Jim Brown, someone Bill had ridden with years ago. Jim raised his hands. "Easy now, I ain't here to turn you in." Bill didn't lower the gun. "Then why are you here?" "Word is, the law's close. They're sending a real hunter after you. Sheriff Milt Mast. He's got men, dogs, and a promise to bring you back, one way or another." Bill smirked. "Let him try." Jim sighed. "He ain't the kind you can scare. He'll keep coming till you're caught." Bill looked at the fire, the flames flickering in his eyes. "Then I'll keep running till I can't." But even Bill knew he couldn't outrun everyone. Sheriff Milt Mast wasn't just any lawman. He was patient, smart, and determined. He'd studied Bill's movements, followed his trail through half the state, and talked to anyone who had ever known him. He learned how Bill thought, where he liked to hide, and even what kind of food he traded for when he dared enter a town. "He's a clever one," the sheriff said to his deputies, "but he's tired, and tired men make mistakes." Bill's mistake came a few weeks later. He had crossed into Louisiana, hoping to disappear. There he found temporary shelter with a family who didn't know who he was. He worked a few days chopping wood, pretending to be just another traveler looking for rest. But his charm, as always, drew attention. One of the men in town grew suspicious. He'd seen the wanted poster. The description matched too well. The tall man with sharp eyes, the smooth voice, the quick smile. That night, while Bill slept, a rider left quietly for the next town to find the sheriff and collect the reward. It was early morning when the lawmen surrounded the small cabin. The sound of boots crunching in the dirt woke Bill instantly. He reached for his revolver, but before he could move, a voice shouted, "Bill Longley, you're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Bill froze. For a moment he thought about fighting, going out in a blaze of glory, like so many outlaws before him. But something inside stopped him. Maybe he was tired of running. Maybe he knew it was over. He shouted back, "You wouldn't shoot a man before breakfast, would you?" There was a pause. Then the sheriff's voice came again, calm but firm. "We'll shoot whenever we have to. Step outside, Bill." Bill sighed, slipped his gun into his holster, and pushed open the door. The sunlight hit his face. Around him stood a half-dozen men with rifles aimed squarely at his chest. "Morning, boys," he said with a grin. "Looks like you caught your ghost." Sheriff Mass stepped forward. "You're done running, Longley." Bill shrugged. "Maybe, but I gave you a good chase, didn't I?" The men tied his hands and put him on a horse. As they rode back toward Texas, Bill kept talking, telling stories, cracking jokes, even singing a few songs. One deputy asked, "You don't seem worried for a man headed to the gallows." Bill smiled. "Worried? I've been facing death since I was 17. This ain't nothing new." But late that night, when the others were asleep, Bill sat staring into the darkness. For the first time in years, he felt small, like the boy he once was, sitting on his family's porch, dreaming of freedom. He whispered to himself, "Guess I ran out of roads." When they arrived back in Texas, people lined the streets to see him. Some came out of curiosity, others out of hate. The sheriff led him through the town, his hands tied but his head held high. Children whispered, "That's him. That's the killer." Old men spat in the dirt as he passed. But Bill just smiled, tipping his hat like a gentleman. He was no longer free, but he still had his pride. That dangerous, unbreakable pride that had carried him through every fight and every lie. When they finally locked him in a cell, the sheriff asked, "Anything you want to say before I send word to the judge?" Bill thought for a moment, then said softly, "Yeah, tell him Bill Longley finally stopped running." In the weeks that followed, rumors spread that he might escape again. Some said his old gang was planning to break him out. Others believed he had friends in high places, but none of it was true. Bill Longley was done. The man who had outrun death for years was finally facing it head-on, and deep down he knew, this time, there was no getting away. The courthouse in Giddings, Texas, was crowded on that warm day in 1878. People from miles around had come to see Bill Longley. The most feared man in Texas finally faced justice. Farmers, townsfolk, reporters, everyone wanted to see if the stories were true. Was he really the charming killer who could shoot faster than lightning and smile at death? Bill sat at the defendant's table, calm as ever. His wrists were bound, but his spirit wasn't. He wore a clean shirt and boots that shined. If you didn't know who he was, you might have thought he was a preacher or a businessman, not a man who had killed in cold blood. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Bill didn't move until the sheriff nudged him. Then with a grin he said, "I don't stand for many men, but I'll make an exception today." Laughter rippled through the courtroom, but the judge wasn't amused. He stared down from the bench and said, "This is no saloon, Mr. Longley. You will show respect here." Bill nodded slightly. "Respect's all I've got left, Your Honor." The charges were serious. The murder of Wilson Anderson, a man who had once been Bill's closest friend. The prosecutor stood tall, holding a piece of paper that listed every crime Bill had ever been accused of: robbery, assault, murder, desertion. The list seemed endless. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, "the man you see before you is not just a gunfighter. He is a killer. He has spilled blood across this state. He has no remorse. He believes he is above the law." He pointed straight at Bill. "Today we end his story." Bill just smiled. When it was his turn to speak, his lawyer, a young man from Houston, tried to defend him. He said Bill had grown up in a violent time, that the war and chaos had twisted him, that he wasn't evil, just lost. But everyone knew that excuse wouldn't save him. The people of Texas were tired of outlaws. They wanted order. They wanted an example, and Bill Longley was the perfect one. During the trial, witnesses came forward. Some spoke with fear, others with anger. One man said, "I saw him shoot Wilson Anderson." He didn't even hesitate. Another said, "He smiled right after pulling the trigger." Bill listened to them all, calm and quiet. When the judge asked if he wanted to say anything, he stood up and looked around the room. "You folks think you know me," he said. "You've heard the stories, that I've killed 30 men, maybe more. But let me tell you something. Half of what you heard ain't true, and the other half don't matter. A man's got to live by his own rules in this world. And sometimes that means breaking yours. He looked at the jury. I never claimed to be a saint, but I ain't the devil either. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed taken aback by his calm voice. Then Bill added softly, I did kill Wilson Anderson. I won't lie about that. I thought he wronged me. I was drunk, angry, and stupid, but I'll face what's coming. I've been running long enough. That confession sealed his fate. The jury didn't take long. When they returned, the foreman stood up and said, We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. The crowd gasped, though everyone expected it. The judge nodded solemnly. Bill Longley, you have been found guilty of the murder of Wilson Anderson. The sentence of this court is that you be hanged by the neck until dead. Bill didn't flinch. He leaned back, smiled, and said, Guess the rope finally caught up to me. The trial was over. But Bill's legend was just beginning. In jail, he became the most talked-about man in Texas. Reporters came from far and wide to see him. They described him as handsome, polite, even friendly, a killer with charm. He gave interviews, told stories, and exaggerated his life. I've killed 32 men, he told one reporter, though no one could ever prove it. Some said he was trying to make himself bigger than death. Others said he was just telling people what they wanted to hear. He even wrote letters, some to old friends, others to women who admired him. In one letter he wrote, Don't believe half the things they say about me. I've done bad, sure, but I've also lived free. Most men can't say that. Even behind bars, Bill Longley was still performing, still trying to be remembered. But there were quiet moments, too. Sometimes, late at night, the guards heard him humming old songs from his childhood. They said he'd sit by the window, staring out at the stars, lost in thought. One night, the sheriff asked him, You ever think about what comes next? Bill smiled faintly. Every night, Sheriff. Every night. The governor was asked if he'd grant a pardon. People argued. Some said Bill didn't deserve mercy. Others said he'd been punished enough. But the governor refused. The execution date was set for October 11th, 1878. When Bill heard the news, he didn't seem surprised. That's fair, he said. A man's got to pay his debts. In the days before his hanging, the town was alive with talk. Merchants sold souvenirs. Reporters wrote headlines like The End of the Texas Terror and Longley's Last Days. Bill played along. He joked with the guards, sang songs, and told stories about his adventures. To the very end, he refused to show fear. But the night before his execution, he asked for one thing, a Bible. He read for hours, his lips moving silently. Then he closed it and whispered, Guess I'll find out if the preacher was right. By dawn, the crowd was already gathering near the gallows. The man who had laughed at death would now face it for real. Bill Longley had gone from legend to prisoner, from outlaw to condemned man. And though the law would soon end his life, it couldn't erase his story, because even on the brink of death, Bill still believed one thing, that as long as people remembered his name, he'd never truly die. The morning of October 11th, 1878, began like any other in Giddings, Texas, quiet, warm, and still. But by sunrise, the streets were already filling with people. Farmers, townsfolk, travelers, hundreds of them gathered near the courthouse yard. They came to see something they'd never forget. Today, Bill Longley, the most notorious gunfighter in Texas, would hang. Some came for justice. Some came for revenge. Others came just to see the legend with their own eyes, the man who had killed, charmed, and laughed his way through life. The gallows stood tall in the morning sun, a rough wooden platform with a single rope hanging from its beam. The noose swayed slightly in the wind, waiting for its guest. Inside the jailhouse, Bill was already awake. He had slept little, if at all. The guard said he spent most of the night reading the Bible he'd asked for. At times, they heard him humming softly, a tune from his childhood, the same one his mother used to sing while working in the fields. When the sheriff entered his cell, Bill looked up and smiled. "Morning, Sheriff," he said calmly. "Beautiful day to die, isn't it?" The sheriff didn't answer. He'd seen many outlaws face death, but none like this one. None so calm, so confident, so alive even at the end. He asked, "You got any last words for the record?" Bill chuckled. "Not yet. I'll save the good ones for the crowd." As they led him outside, the sunlight hit his face. He blinked once, then looked around at the crowd. There were so many faces, angry, curious, fearful. Some whispered prayers, others curses. Bill walked with a slow, steady stride, his boots thudding softly against the wooden steps. His wrists were tied in front of him, but his back was straight. He looked more like a man walking to church than to the gallows. When he reached the platform, he turned to the crowd and smiled, the same charming, fearless smile that had carried him through gunfights and bar rooms across Texas. The preacher stepped forward with a Bible in his hands. "William Longley," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "do you wish to say anything before you meet your Maker?" Bill looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, preacher. Tell him I ain't half as bad as people say." A few people in the crowd laughed nervously. Others murmured in disapproval. But Bill wasn't joking, not entirely. He continued, louder now so everyone could hear. "I know what I've done. I've killed men, too many. Some deserved it, some didn't. I've lived fast, I've lied plenty, and I've paid for it every mile I rode." He paused, looking over the faces in the crowd. "But I'll tell you this, I never ran from the truth. Not once." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Bill smiled again and said softly, "I deserve this fate. It's a debt I've owed for a long time." The hangman stepped forward and adjusted the rope around Bill's neck. The crowd shifted, whispering, waiting. A woman in the front row turned away, unable to watch. Bill looked out over the people one last time. "Don't be too hard on me," he said with a half smile. "The world made me what I am." Those would be his final words. The sheriff gave the signal. The hangman pulled the lever. The trapdoor dropped. The rope snapped tight. The crowd gasped. For a moment, Bill's body jerked, then went still. But something strange happened. His face didn't twist in pain. His lips stayed curved in a faint, peaceful smile. Whispers spread instantly. "Did you see that?" someone said. He smiled. Others claimed his body didn't move for several seconds, that the hangman had misjudged the drop, that Bill was still alive. One man swore he saw the hangman wink at the sheriff. Another insisted that friends of Bill's had bribed the officials to fake his death. By the time the sun set that evening, rumors were already spreading, that Bill Longley hadn't died at all. Some said the rope had been cut early and that he was whisked away to Mexico under a false name. Others said he lived out his years in Louisiana, working as a ranch hand, laughing at the world that thought him dead. No proof ever surfaced, but the legend refused to die. The truth, though, was far simpler. Bill Longley was buried in the Giddings Cemetery that same afternoon. His grave was marked with a simple wooden cross. No flowers, no family, no mourners, just the wind and the dust. A few days later, a reporter wrote, "Bill Longley died as he lived, proud, defiant, and smiling at death. And that's how history would remember him." Even in death, his story spread like wildfire. Every town added its own version. In one, he escaped the hangman's noose. In another, he shot his way out of the gallows. Some said the devil himself came to claim him. But the truth didn't matter anymore. The legend had taken over. The man who once said, "A good story lasts longer than a good man," had gotten exactly what he wanted. He was gone, but people couldn't stop talking about him. Years later, travelers passing through Giddings would stop at the old graveyard and ask to see his resting place. The locals would point toward the small, weathered cross and say, "That's where the Texas Terror sleeps." Some swore that at night, under a full moon, you could still hear him. That soft laugh, that calm voice whispering, "Guess the rope wasn't tight enough." No one ever proved it, but no one ever forgot him either. Bill Longley had lived a short, violent life, only 27 years, but he had carved his name deep into the heart of Texas legend. He was a killer and a showman, a sinner and a storyteller. He smiled at death because he had been chasing it all along, and in the end, death smiled back. The dust of Giddings, Texas had long settled over the grave of Bill Longley. The wooden cross that once bore his name began to fade, worn down by wind and time. But the story of the man beneath it, the outlaw who smiled at the hangman, only grew stronger. In life, Bill Longley was a killer. In death, he became a legend. For years after his hanging in 1878, people couldn't stop talking about him. In saloons, around campfires, and on the front porches of Texas, his name was spoken with a mix of fear, fascination, and disbelief. Some called him a monster, others called him a hero. But everyone agreed on one thing: Bill Longley was unforgettable. The rumors started almost immediately. Some said the hanging had been faked. They claimed that a friend of Bill's had bribed the sheriff and that the man buried in Giddings wasn't Bill at all. There were whispers of a secret escape, a staged death, and a horse waiting in the shadows that night. People told stories of seeing him years later, in Louisiana, in Arkansas, even as far away as Mexico. "He's alive," they'd say. The devil couldn't hang Bill Longley. But there was never proof, only stories. The truth was that Bill's death, real or imagined, gave him what he'd always wanted: immortality through legend. He had lived his life as if it were a story being written with every gunshot, every lie, every laugh. And even in death, the story continued to grow. Newspapers printed tales that made him larger than life. They called him the Texas Terror, the handsome killer, and the fastest gun in the West. Some claimed he'd killed over 100 men, others said 50. Historians later proved most of it was false, but that didn't matter, because by then, Bill Longley was no longer just a man. He was a myth. In the years that followed, the Wild West itself began to fade. The frontier closed. The cowboys and outlaws who once ruled it disappeared. But the stories remained, tales of gunslingers who lived fast and died young, and among those names, Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Wild Bill Hickok, was always Bill Longley. Yet there was something different about him. He wasn't a robber or a rebel fighting for a cause. He was something darker, something sadder. A man who killed not for money or glory, but because he didn't know any other way to live. People who studied him later tried to understand what made him that way. Was he born bad, or was he shaped by a world that glorified violence and survival above all else? Bill grew up in a Texas torn apart by war, in a time when law was weak and life was cheap. He learned early that a gun could make a man powerful, and that fear could make him respected. But what he never learned was peace. Even at the height of his fame, surrounded by laughter and whiskey, there was a loneliness in him, a hole that no amount of attention could fill. He was a man chasing something he could never catch. Maybe freedom, maybe redemption, maybe just himself. Old men who remembered him said he had two faces. One was kind, generous, and full of charm. The other was cruel, cold, and ready to kill at a moment's notice. Bill Longley could shake your hand, one man said, and shoot you 5 minutes later. He wasn't just a product of his time, he was a reflection of it, a mirror showing what life in the Wild West could do to a man who lived too fast and cared too little. As the years passed, writers and filmmakers turned his story into legend. Books were written, songs were sung, and movies were made loosely based on his life. Some made him a villain. Others turned him into an anti-hero, the charming rogue who laughed in the face of death. But the real Bill Longley was more complicated than that. He wasn't brave. He wasn't noble. He was human, full of anger, pride, charm, and regret. He once said to a guard in his final days, "I've done wrong, but I've lived my life my way." That line, whether real or not, captured who he was, a man who lived by his own rules, even when those rules destroyed him. Over time, people stopped visiting his grave. The wooden cross rotted away, replaced by a simple stone marker years later. But still, travelers would sometimes stop and stand over it in silence, imagining the man who had once defied law and death itself. The wind would blow softly through the grass, and for a moment, it almost felt like he was still there. That faint laugh, that quiet confidence, that ghost of the Wild West refusing to rest. Today, historians see Bill Longley as one of the most dangerous gunmen in Texas history, and one of the most tragic. He had intelligence, wit, and charisma enough to build a better life, but he wasted it all chasing power and pride. His story isn't just about murder and revenge, It's about what happens when a man becomes addicted to his own legend, when the line between truth and fame disappears. In the end, Bill Longley wasn't the hero or the villain of his story. He was both. A man who lived by the gun and died by it, not in a blaze of glory, but on a wooden platform, with a rope around his neck and a smile on his lips. Even now, nearly a century and a half later, his ghost still lingers in the pages of history and the imagination of storytellers. Because some men die once, but legends never stop living, and Bill Longley, the charming killer of Texas, will forever ride through the dusty trails of the Wild West, half man, half myth, and completely unforgettable.